How's it going, guys? And welcome back to another episode of my Ultimate Zane Guide. Today, we are taking a look at how to do damage with every single one of Zane's action skills by looking at the damage formulas. This video will compile some information found around the internet, through forums, Reddit posts, other videos, all that. But also, something I couldn't find was a lot of information on Sentinel. So I compiled that myself. I tested everything. I retested everything with the other skills. I confirmed that everything is still working correctly, so this information should be, for the most part, 100% correct, unless I fucked something up. But yeah, let's get into it. So just to start out, I have a bit of general information that I want to go over. Action skills scale with your Mayhem level. I am doing all of these formulas that I will show at Mayhem 10, which means that they get a 31 times multiplier to their base damage. This applies for the action skills themselves and many of their augments that deal damage. Some other general information just to get out of the way real quick. The 0.M shield is a 50% action skill damage boost as long as you are standing in the shield. This applies to everything Clone, Sentinel, and Mantis. It is additive with actual action skill damage from other sources. Debuffs like the Eruption, Servos Execute, and the It's Pissed Grenade apply to action skills as well. This is usually a multiplicative bonus. 150/90, Terror Cryo, URAD, and the Revolter all apply to your skills, except for Clone where URAD doesn't apply and the Revolter applies a little bit differently. But with that being said, let's start off with Sentinel. So starting us off, this is the Sentinel damage formula for Mayhem 10. It's your base damage times your Mayhem modifier times elemental times splash times action skill damage, and then times a couple other various things like your debuffs, no way out, and your other sort of stuff. We'll get into what that other stuff is in a minute. So we'll go in order of this formula to break down where you get each thing from. You can get elemental damage boosts from Old Gods, from your passive artifact rolls, and from the Executor class mod. This elemental boost applies to everything that the drone can do. This includes your Winter's Drone augment, this includes Bad Dose, and this includes Static Field. Now you can kind of ignore Bad Dose as while it does get increased damage, it's still really not that much as it pretty much only does a dot effect, but Winter's Drone and Static Field can actually be boosted up to quite a bit of damage. And up next we have Splash Damage. Of course the drone doesn't actually do splash damage in its base form, but splash damage does actually apply to Boomsday and Almighty Ordnance. You can roll splash damage on class mods and area of effect damage, which is just splash damage on your artifacts. But along with that, you can actually get ASE Splash to apply to this, which is really interesting and can actually let you get a lot of damage out of Boomsday and Almighty Ordnance. Because remember, these are also getting Mayhem scaling on their damage. So not only are you just getting that 31 times damage boost on Mayhem 10, but you can then boost that by another multiplicative 125%. Now for action skill damage, there's really only two sources of this that Zane has access to, but these are pretty good sources of it. You can roll it as one of your passives on a class mod, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can also get it from the 0.M shield. When this shield breaks, it spawns a little circle at your feet, and as long as you're standing in that circle, you get a 50% bonus to your weapon damage and to your action skill damage. Moving on in the formula, as I mentioned, you get your debuffs. This is the It's Pissed Grenade, the Servos Execute, and the Zhaistev's Eruption. Then you have No Way Out, which is one of your augments for your MNTIS Cannon, which does seem to, weirdly enough, be multiplicative with other debuffs. And then we have our others category, which is where I didn't really know where to put this because there's some sources of V1 and V2 damage that the drone gets, but it doesn't get all of them. For example, the Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge does not work with drone, and neither does Our Man Flint, but not entirely. The only part of Our Man Flint you don't get with drone is the actual damage part, but you do get the elemental effects applying as long as you are ADS'd if you are using Winter's Drone. So Our Man Flint can help you freeze things, which can be very beneficial if you're using a Icebreaker, because the drone actually gets Icebreaker damage. It also gets the damage boost from Victory Rush, it gets the damage boost from the Terror Damage Anointment, and from the 25% on grenade throw anointment, and finally it gets it from the 150/90 anointment. All of these damage boosts are either V1 or V2, which I originally did have in this formula until I realized that not everything applies for some reason. I do believe that this list is complete. I think I tested every source of V1 or V2 damage that should apply, but if there's anything that I missed, please let me know down below and I will pin it for anyone else to go take a look at. A few more things to go over. The Sentinel cannot crit, which is why there's no crit section to this formula. You can also not apply different elements to your drone using ASEs, but what you can use is the URAD or Terror Cryo anointments. Those apply to your action skills, along with the Revolter, which can apply some shock damage to your drone. Up next is our other large section, which is the clone. Here is the damage formula for your clone. You have your base damage times 0.7, as the clone actually gets a slight damage penalty, and then it is multiplied by the times 31 for being on Mayhem 10. This second section is mostly for your skills, so Donnybrook, Broom Enhanced, Double Barrel, but you also have shield weapon damage. So the shield weapon damage is for the shields that are like the Band of Sidorak and the Ward. These are shields that give you bonus weapon damage when you are wearing them, as long as there is a certain condition met. Because the clone actually gets a copy of these shields himself, as long as his shield is depleted, he will gain these effects. This is also how the Revolter works on clone. His shield has to be depleted, but he will get that shock damage. Now later on in the formula, you can see that there is the Old God. The Old God works a little bit differently just because it is elemental damage. These shields only interact with the clone when they are actually on him. You cannot just wear these shields yourselves and he will benefit from them. You have to be wearing it so that it duplicates onto your clone. And next we have action skill damage. Of course, the same sources apply here. You get action skill damage from your class mods, and you can get a 50% bonus as long as you're standing in the circle spawned by the 0.M shield. From there we have the debuffs, again the Zhystev's Eruption, the Servo's Execute, the It's Piss, and No Way Out, which is multiplied separately. And then clone will get a multiplicative boost from amp damage if he has amp on his shield, and he gains splash damage bonuses. These splash damage bonuses, similarly to the drone, come from your class mod, they can come from your artifact, and they can come from you holding a 125% ASE splash damage anointment on the gun in your hands. I need to be very specific on this because this is important. Your Digi-Clone does not get your anointments. All of his gear is completely unanointed when he holds it. However, there are a couple specific anointments that do affect him as long as Zane himself is holding them in his hands. These anointments are ASE Splash, 150/90, the Elemental Crit Novas, and Terror Cryo. This lets the clone hold guns that cannot roll with these anointments, and you can hold a separate gun that has one of these anointments and it gets them. A very good example of this is the Sandhawk. The Sandhawk is completely unable to roll with ASE Splash on the gun itself. If you give clone a Sandhawk, you can then hold a separate gun that has ASE Splash on it and he will get that bonus. And as I said, the only anointments that this functions with is ASE Splash, 150/90, the Elemental Crit Novas, and Terror Cryo. Something quite interesting to note about clone is that while it doesn't actually get any boost to its crit damage, it can actually proc Eraser, which does mean that Eraser is pretty good to pick up for clone builds. On to MNTIS Cannon. Of course, once again, we have base damage times 31 for the Mayhem scaling. MNTIS Cannon is the first one that does actually get V1 and V2 damage. It does seem that every single source of V1 and V2 damage does affect this, which is very good because currently in the meta, MNTIS is very just kind of plug and play. We use MNTIS in a lot of the best Zane builds to proc ASEs, so having MNTIS have by far and away the best and most versatile damage formula is very good because it does actually mean that MNTIS benefits from a lot of the stuff that we put on Zane to benefit Zane himself. Along with that, it lets us have the option of actually fully maximizing our damage to insane degrees to where you can make builds fully focusing on the MNTIS Cannon's damage itself. So of course, V1, V2, these damage sources are the same across the entire game. You get them from certain artifacts, some skills, some Guardian rank stuff even. There are many different sources and many different resources that you can find that list all of them. Of course, next we have Elemental, Crit, and Action Skill damage. All of these boost the MNTIS Cannon, and all of them can be gotten from various artifacts, class mods, shields in the case of the Old God and the 0.M, and the Executor boosts both crit and the elemental damage if you use the cryo version of MNTIS Cannon. Any crit damage boosts that you find within Zane's skill trees also boost the MNTIS Cannon. It then also, of course, benefits from No Way Out, which is another augment that it provides. It benefits from debuffs, the Servo's Execute, the It's Piss, and the Zhystev's Proliferation, which is another augment, and it gets bonus elements. This is ASEs, this is URAD, this is the Revolter, Terror Cryo, anything that gives bonus elements, this will actually benefit from. This is the only action skill to do so. It, of course, also gets 150/90, so if you want to to do some one-shot shenanigans with MNTIS Cannon, you definitely can. And last but not least, except actually probably least because this has very little to talk about, it is the barrier, probably the most versatile action skill, but there's very little that this can actually scale off of. And by very little, I mean nothing. It does not get any sort of mayhem scaling or action skill damage boosts. There is absolutely no way to boost the damage that the barrier provides other than just boosting your own damage and giving it a bigger thing to multiply. However, it does have two specific quirks that is good to note. The amp damage does actually lower when you pick up the barrier. It goes from 25% when it is on the ground to 14.4% when it is in your hands. Along with that, it also boosts the damage from all your other action skills if they shoot through it. This includes MNTIS, Clone, and Drone. If any of them fire through the barrier itself, they will be amped. But that's not about do it. There is a lot to go over here. This video probably had the most research put into it so far out of any of the other ones. So I do definitely hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys find this helpful. If there's any questions, any at all, put them in the comments and I will try my best to answer them. But that's not about do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that, and I'll see you in the next one.